Welcome to our first lesson in product rendering with V-Ray. In our course, we will tackle the following asset that I found on CG Trader. Here is the page where you can find it if you'd like to follow along as we take this product through various lighting stages. I will go in further detail in scene prepping in the following videos when it comes to this asset, but for now, let's talk about product rendering. In my personal experience, when it comes to lighting for a product, the scrutiny to every angle and detail of the geometry needs to be addressed. This render would normally be handed off to other departments in marketing for either web, print, or packaging, so the client wants to ensure the product is looking its very best. Let's take a look at some real-world examples along with our asset. I did a quick Google search using the phrase espresso machine Amazon. This gives us one of the different types of product renders called white space renders, as opposed to contextual renders, which are usually renders that are done within an environment, sort of showcasing where it would live. A white space render is usually just behind a white background. These are great because you can focus on the product, and you can also use this for print, web, or packaging by just removing the white background and with transparency and putting it where you need it. There are a few quick examples I've chosen now that we can break down further. For instance, here I really like this image because, as you can see, the camera lens is pretty shallow. It tightens everything up, it flattens a lot of stuff out, but it actually has everything really nicely and organized. We see a lot of verticals, a lot of horizontals. I have a few guides here. You can see how everything is nice and neat and all compact, and it's very quick. The eye catches it right away. It's a simple shape. Also, the way they use lighting to sort of guide your eyes is another thing that caught this image with my attention. So if we click on this guide here, we have this nice big flow of light going from the top left all the way down. And if you notice on the top left, the hottest spot is around the logo, which is great. Your eye goes directly there, and then it sort of brings you to the rest of the product as your eye goes down. Another thing I want to point out is that we have a lot of these little chrome sections that may or may not reflect the actual product or the actual environment. And as you'll see when we go further in, a lot of these chrome details are very custom, and we have a lot of artistic liberty to dictate what we want to see within the chrome materials. So that gets a lot tricky, a lot of back and forth, but we get there when we get there. Switch over to another example I have. Is a little bit more wider, and I'm sorry for the resolution. This is the highest one I could find, but this one was also very interesting to take a look at because there's a lot of gadgets, a lot of materials going on, and a lot of directional of lights. I'm gonna quickly turn on this guide so you can see also that it does have the same very tight camera lens. We see a lot of horizontals, verticals, nice and neat, but also it has a lot of directions within the light. We have these big sweeping left to right. We also have a big sweeping right to left. But then we also have a lot of these little sections within here that are treated on their own. For instance, on here in the top left, you see it's left to right, but then we have this chrome ring that has the lighting direction from top to bottom, which gives me the indication that this is being treated as a separate lighting scenario. Same goes with these buttons over here. They all seem to have the same anisotropic reflections, and it doesn't feel like they're all getting it from one singular light from, let's say, the right. It looks like they each have their own individual light, maybe or maybe not. Usually that's how I would treat it personally, to ensure that everything is all equal, nothing seems a little bit off. It's nice and neat. If you also take a look at here on the top left, this brings up another concept is when you are rendering a product, you want to make sure you emphasize the shapes. You can feel the roundness or the sharpness within the geometry. So here was a nice indication. It's very simple, and a nice hot light in the center falling off. And again, it is a light that I don't expect is the same one that is coming from, let's say, over here on the right side. So it looks like everything's being treated separately, and we sort of bring it all back together. We have all these chrome pieces as well that have a lot of interesting breakups and very customizable fall offs, which are always nice, and this is something that we're going to get into. There might be instances where we're going to jump in and have to create mesh lights or area lights, specifically targeting and light linking certain aspects of the geometry. Let's just jump to one more example here. This is more of a quarter angle. It's also nice and tight, you know, it's all compact, but we still get a feeling of some perspective. And I like this image too because it brings up not roundness, but now more sharpness within the geometry. We can tell where the edge starts and ends. We have these nice contrasts hitting it between light and dark, which is another important thing when it comes to rendering products. You want to make sure contrast is always good. That catches the viewer's eye right away, and also you can use it as a way to really break up surfaces between the materials. For instance, here we have these nice dark bridges, but then we have these nice little highlights that are getting caught right around the edge. And now this may or may not be physically possible to get into a light, whether we'll have to do some sort of light linking on this geo or some sort of post-production thing where maybe the light just physically cannot get caught there. We'll bring it into Nuke or Photoshop for finer refinements and things like that for this image instance if we were to tackle it. I'm gonna just throw on these guides. You can see it's all nice and compact, but the big one here I wanted to show off. Let me turn these guys off again. I did just really contrast the curve to just emphasize those little hot edges that where I was talking about along the edge. Take note of all the hard contrasts, which is always attractive to the eye. Really nice fall offs in areas to really emphasize the materials. You can tell right away what parts are chrome, what parts are a little bit more matted. And these are the things to always be aware of. You know, understand your material and make sure your lights are reflecting how they should for that material. Otherwise, it's just going to look weird. Even the consumer might not even know, is this thing chrome or is this supposed to be matte? You know, it's a nice balancing act between artistic and also being true to the product itself. These are some of the directionals I found interesting within here. If we look at the top, if we look at the top section over here, we have these nice left to right, right to left, and we also have a center light sort of catching these rims and falling off to the distance, giving a nice directional going towards the back of the asset, which again gives it more interesting movement all throughout. And as we go on, we'll see that even something like this top piece versus this piece here versus all the way at the bottom are all being treated separately, and we might end up having to literally break these off into each their own render layers. And finally we get to our hero. So this is the best reference I can find on the asset that we're gonna do. We're gonna try and match this as close as we can. We'll also try and do our own little techniques to get certain areas more emphasized if we need to. For instance, there are areas that I would change. I probably would want a more interesting reflection up here. I think we can do a lot of interesting things here. We can also maybe adjust some of this reflection. I think is a bit too strong for me. We can play around with it as well. Let me turn on this guide so you can see these big sweeping lights. Again, we're getting the same thing, whether it's going left to right, but then right to left. And again, this is the camera we're going to target. A nice shallow one. Get it all nice and boxed in and get it ready for packaging. Some last minute notes I want to address before we move on are areas where there are two pieces of geo tightly knit. We always want to make sure we separate them with some sort of highlight to differentiate between angles or just change of direction. Some of these very, very tight highlights may or may not be possible within a light. We might end up getting too much of a fall off, either going up here or down here, and we might have to go either the mesh light route or go even further, and probably gonna have to tackle some of these tight highlights in Nuke or even Photoshop just to get even further refinements. But these are things to be aware of. How you see how we're separating between this edge here, between the surface, things like this. Another last thing I want to make sure you guys are aware of is when it comes to certain materials, things might get really, really dark, but as a lighter, you want to make sure that there's always detail even in the darkest areas, and we can push and pull this detail in post-production. For instance, if we jump back here to this example, you see how dark it is in here. I'm gonna turn off these guides. but you can still see some sort of edge and you can tell what's happening in there. And again, this already might have gone through some post-production, but again, as a lighter, make sure there's always detail in here to showcase, even in the darkest areas, differentiation between the geometry, which is always good to tell. Or you can even tell, even from a distance, you have a feeling if there's more stuff in there. So for those who are following along, these are some of the directories you see when you download from CG Trader. Now, there might be an easier way to do this, but I was not able to grab the V-Ray shaders off of the FBX when I brought it into Maya. So this might be a much longer route, but here's my scene setup, and hopefully you guys find a much easier way, but this is the way I was able to get it to work. So I opened up the Max scene in 3ds Max, because I usually don't deal with Max often. The only thing I knew was as I brought it in was just right-clicked, just drag everything, right-clicked, and hit .vr scene exporter. Now this allowed me to just, instead of FBX files, this was just a specific V-Ray scene. I just changed the V-Ray path to V-Ray for Maya 2018 and just hit export. So now this should bring everything out. And now when I switch back into Maya, I will show you what happens when I import the FBX. So I'm already here. If I go FBX, we see the geometry come in, but there are some discrepancies here. You see some of these are Lambert, some of these are Phong, but the good thing about this was, instead of grabbing the OBJ, was some of these I can tell what is at least being assigned to, at least by the name. And this is going to be important when we start bringing in those V-Ray shaders, at least to give us a guide as to what goes where. But before we do that, things are already getting messy in the Hypershade. So one way just to quickly distinguish which are from the FBX and which one are new was I grab everything except obviously your Lambert shader glow and particle cloud. Go under Windows, General, Namespace Editor. Now this is just literally just so I can distinguish what is from what when I rebuild this. I'm hit new and I'm just going to do FBX underscore. Hit OK. Selected, and now that we have all the shaders selected, I'm just going to do add selected. So now we can distinguish what shaders are from where, and that's just a really quick way to do it. And now if we go under V-Ray, Tools, Import V-Ray Materials from File, just go search for that file we exported. Select all and hit import. Now as you see, it gets pretty messy really quick, but we are able to tell what is which. Our namespaces are separating it here, and then we can sort of, what I did was I kind of went one by one, and it is a little bit of a drag, but I did go and see, okay, this one's name. So you see this one is assigned to here, and then I just looked for that same one, and it's a trophy. Right here, steel. And then just double checked. Let me just double check it is. Looks like it's this guy. All right, and I'm just gonna hit assign material. So essentially that's what I did. I kind of looked at it and then looked for the corresponding shader and just assigned them. Now I'm not gonna do this live here. This was just to show you what I had to do. If I just switch over to this Maya, I already have it all set up. And I had to do some cleanup. But just I just cleaned up some of the naming just to give it more, just so as a guide so I know what goes where, and separated some stuff into groups. So we have a tank back here, and we have the coffee beans separated. The cups are separated into their own groups just for quick selections. And you know, after you go through all that, and again, there might be a better way, this is just the way I was able to do it, then we can get started on setting up our scene for rendering. One of the first things I'd like to do is take a look at the geometry. Obviously it's not smooth, it's low poly, but we want to make sure we have control when it comes to rendering all these pieces. At least we want one subdivide throughout the whole thing. So I'm just going to dump everything for now under one. Under object properties, we'll just do a single, you know what? No, we're going to do we'll do a displacement. Add a single VRay displacement to selection. So that what that does is throws all this geometry under this displacement here. And I'm just going to throw in a new attribute, subdivision. What it does, it's looking at the settings located under your render settings under VRay, default displacement subdivision. It's basically looking at this and it's applying this into your geometry that is inside of your VRay displacement object here. So I'm just gonna quickly, right, just to be clean around it. Let's see, I'm just gonna call this Barista Express VRay displacement. And speaking of breaking things apart, usually when it comes to these things, for instance the buttons, I can already tell I might handle this as a separate entity on its own. What I like to do is start separating what pieces are going to belong in their own object properties. So for instance, this guy, I'm going to create VRay object properties, add single object property node to selection. Now I'm isolating this on its own so I can have control whether or not maybe in some render layer I'm gonna just primary viz, just turn it off completely, don't let it get affected by anything in this certain render layer. I don't know, I'm just thinking ahead of certain areas that I might want to isolate, and these change as I go on usually, but you know, I'd like to keep naming. Let me just see the name of the geo here that I put. Just put buttons, so I'm just gonna put buttons underscore. This guy here, this portafilter, create object properties, add single object property, portafilter. Okay. Definitely the cups are going to be its own. And I'll do this guy, the steam pitcher. So these are components that I definitely know I'm going to treat on its own. This piece maybe along with that guy. You know what? Maybe just a ring. Main window express. Now I'm not 100% sure if I'm going to do these this way. I'm just gonna go on my gut. Certain areas that I know I might isolate. These guys definitely I'm gonna treat them out. It might not even be in the render for now. And I'll just keep everything at default settings for now, since we're still just setting things up. And if you ever want to add something into VRay, I just usually drag and drop it here. So now it's been assigned to this VRay property. I think for now that might be the main components, maybe this guy later. But for now, we'll just keep it at that.